finish my recording. Oh, thank you. Went to Princeton University where I completed my doctorate in molecular biology. But it's from hopping throughout all these agricultural fields that I started to develop this sense of a motto that Oberlin College had, which is learning and labor, and combining it with Princeton's motto, which is in service to humanity. And the fact that the sort of multiplicity of identities that we possess, that when we move out into the world and try to, carve a niche for ourselves, that we should be able to approach it sort of thinking about what are we learning along the way, what are the fruits of our labor, and how can we make sure that all of that is sort of leading to a service to humanity. And being at Oberlin was really great because I felt like I was really able to sort of combine my sort of biology research and my passion to music into sort of a way to do this. And I really, in time moving it forward, wanted to make sure that it was laying the foundation to engage in like critical issues of social justice in the community when I went into graduate school. And so in graduate school, I focused in predominantly on a health sort of oriented topic, particularly the idea of healthcare associated infections. A healthcare associated infection is just sort of a secondary infection that you contract when you go to a hospital or a clinic for some sort of primary care. It happens at a higher frequency than you think. About 1 in 5, 1 in 20, or 5% of folks have a chance of contracting a healthcare associated infection that increases your length of stay in the hospital by up to 17 days, and actually is a pretty large killer as it leads to about 100,000 deaths in the US annually. And of course, us being in a pandemic, we start to see that this happens at an even even greater frequency. So this data here that I'm presenting comes from a hospital in rural Georgia, where basically we had different COVID patients. Some of them developed a secondary infection while they were there, some did not. And if you just look at the numbers in terms of the number of percent that passed from being due to COVID-19, not having a healthcare associated infection, you have about 10% death rate, whereas it was about 40% for those who developed the secondary infections. And it's very well known that in a lot of patients who enter the hospital, it's not the primary thing that really gets them in the end, but really it's these sort of secondary infections that are caused by a large number of bacterial players. The sort of major ones I kind of show here and are here on this little fun infographic on the right in terms of pictures. They're referred to as the escape pathogens. They represent the main players in healthcare associated infections, and they're called escape, not only because their name spells out the word escape, but because they also escape clinical treatment methods. Just by looking at this sort of national healthcare data, we see that 46% of infections caused in the clinic are by these escape pathogens. And so when we're trying to develop therapeutics, our gold standard is to develop antimicrobials that either effectively kill these pathogens or will limit their virulence and their ways of causing deleterious health outcomes in people. So when I hopped on this project, or what got me interested in this is sort of thinking about the sort of spectrum of pathogenesis, thinking about the ways in which, okay, these are the sort of hot topic people, sort of the red end of the spectrum, the things that we're really concerned about. However, if the pandemic has taught us anything, if we don't look at the things that are on the other end of the spectrum that may be moving their way up, then we may miss out on potential opportunistic pathogens that may prove to be a problem in the clinic in the future. And so I was just curious as to some other pathogens that may be playing out in the clinic and what the relevance are. And in particular, I was studying this one species of bacteria, Caulobacter crescentus, which is a really cute bacteria. I won't get into too much detail for the sake of this conversation, but some like fun factoids about this species is that it gets its name from its canonical curve shape that you see here. And it's regularly isolated from freshwater, or you can think of it as nutrient deprived environments. And we think of this as sort of an environmental isolate, a bacteria that we sort of just see out in nature, not something that we would think to have clinical relevance. They have this really funky dimorphic life cycle that reflects other cell cycle-like behaviors that we see in higher organisms. And historically, they've been considered a non-pathogenic species. But what I think was really fascinating about these bacteria is that they really are kind of found everywhere. And if we look back in sort of the history of Caulobacter, we look back at this paper from 1981 by Jean Poindexter, who was sort of the mother of the Caulibacter, of studying this bacteria. She made this observation that while the Caulibacters are distinctive in morphology and possibly as ubiquitous in the biosphere as water itself, that they have developed excited greater interest by their developmental peculiarities rather than their presence in practically every type of aquatic community and in many soils. So here we have this environmental bacteria that's found basically everywhere in nature. So I was really curious as to where do we find it, or if we even find it in the clinic. And what was kind of surprising to me was that, and what led to my first paper, is that Caulibacter actually was found in the clinic, and several reported clinical cases that were all secondary healthcare associated infections, not getting Caulibacter in the wild and then getting sick, but rather going into the hospital for, say, undergoing dialysis and then developing an infection that was caused by Caulibacter. So I was able to take these clinical Caulibacter plus other environmental derivatives of Caulibacter and actually do different genetic testings in order to actually determine how similar they were, as well as different phenotypic characterizations to sort of just see how similar they play out in infection by using a in vivo health model. And I was able to show that these Caulibacters, not just the clinical ones, but even the sort of run-of-the-mill ones that you find in fresh water, are able to, in this infection model, cause virulence. And it's mediated by a toxic molecule that we call LPS. And a sort of final takeaway from this story, and again, if y'all want to focus on this for the conversation, we can, was that we may be underreporting our clinical relevance of Caulibacter simply due to the ways in which we're identifying and culturing bacteria in the clinic, raising some very interesting ideas about Caulibacter and just generally environmental bacteria as to whether or not their relevance in the clinic, and thus I think maybe provides us some new hot topic bacteria that we can start to study for their ability to cause infectious disease. So it was really cool to have a project like this, and sort of rest of my work focus on looking at different aspects of Caulibacter, functional appendages, cell shape, its ability to grow in these different nutrient conditions, antibiotic resistance, colonizing different body sites or colonizing different places in the hospital, as well as being able to avoid predators either in the wild or within the human body. And so I sort of was looking at all of these aspects throughout my dissertation and trying to relate this back to the idea of human health. Because again, from my perspective, good science is one that is rigorously done in terms of making sure that we have valid controls and that we are asking questions that we may not even want to know the answer to because it may shoot you in the foot later on for a paper, but also that the questions we're asking have relevance to society and concerns that people have. So sort of the lessons that I've had so far in this lovely biology journey that I've had, and is kind of within the next couple slides. The first is that while I think we should be doing really great science, I think that one thing I would advise for a lot of folks is to try to be a scientist in service and to be able to engage our work with government and the public. One of the really great opportunities I had as a graduate student was there was this organization called Princeton Citizen Scientists, where we actually went to DC and we talked to all of our representatives about different topics based on the research that we did. So I got a great opportunity to talk about the necessity of increasing science funding and was able to give some anecdotes, not just from my science work, but also just from my personal lived experience as a first-gen low-income scientist from South Carolina. And I think that that's really what was made for a very compelling story when talking to the representatives, but also showed me that even if we're doing the most rigorous science in a test tube, if we're not able to translate the science into a story, and then that story into a way that actually motivates people to believing that we're doing good work, then it kind of falls flat at the end of the day. And it's really what got me interested in doing the work that I do now as an Eagleton Science Policy Fellow. And right now I'm working at the New Jersey Department of Health, and we're working specifically in the Office of Minority and Multicultural Health to try to combat different COVID health inequities that have come about due to the pandemic. So as you can imagine, specific communities particularly communities of color, rural communities, poor communities, have limited access to vaccine and testing resources than a lot of folks, despite the messaging that getting a vaccine is very easy, and that a lot of these sort of health inequities are driven by different social determinants of health. People not able to get transportation to a vaccination or testing site. People are unable to take time off of work because they maybe don't have baby care, babysitting services that are affordable within their community to then be able to take time to go to the clinic and get their vaccine. So I think that there's a lot of so it's really cool work right now to be able to sort of try to address these issues in a real tangible way by creating metrics and ways and grants that we can give out to the community, so that way there are funds in the community to promote access to these resources, but then also working with different community agencies to actually identify where the next area of need is as we continue to move the marker of getting more and more folks vaccinated and increasing education and literacy around vaccination testing, that we're also identifying new holes that may be popping up, especially nowadays, as you know, like the news is talking about getting booster shots. We're really having to do some work in trying to make sure that everyone has the right amount of education and literacy when making decisions about their health. So, and I think that it's been really rewarding work, and I think it's something that you can do from full on working in the government to just having these sort of visit days to be able to just share your experience. I think the government and the public, thank you for being able to do that kind of work. The other piece I would say is to try to create and commune with coalitions that promote equity in science. I've had a really great opportunity to be able to go to different conferences such as SOCNIS, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Native Americans in Science, ABERCAMS, the annual biomedical research conference for minority students, as well as different LGBT organizations, to just be able to present work either that I did at the bench or to actually facilitate conversations like these that we're having now, where we can just talk about the different barriers that are preventing equitable science from being able to be performed, finding new and innovative strategies for making sure that everyone is at the table who deserves a seat at the table, and not just those who've been, able to jump through barriers and hoops because they were privy to the table to begin with. And I think that being able to do things like this really reinforce that we're not alone when we're doing our science. I think, from my own experience, you're in a lab, there's maybe 10 to 12 of you, and maybe no one in your lab looks like you or acts like you or thinks like you. And so then you can really feel as if you're not even supposed to be there a lot of times. And so having spaces like this, whether you have to create them yourself, because I know for my own past, I didn't always enter a space and there was a space for me to be able to be in a community like that. So sometimes you have to actively create it. Sometimes you can just simply join organizations like this one, the Women in STEM here at CCNY, to just be able to feel a sense of belonging, feel a sense of togetherness, and then be able to use that as a platform to make space for the next generation of scientists. Very rewarding. I think it's something that one of the things that I think every scientist at whatever stage you are should be doing. And then sort of lastly, I think is to just be intentionally intersectional, because everything can improve your science and your personhood. And one of the, oddest things I didn't think would really connect to my ability to communicate good science is that I actually, during my time at grad school, become a professional drag queen and somewhat professional event planner, working with different organizations, student organizations at Princeton and the LGBT Center. I've been able to sort of create like really cool events that have been really fun to do, but also expose people to, different lifestyles or different ways of moving through the world that I think the average scientist doesn't engage with. And I think that that's been really rewarding for me. And because I think that now these scientists that sort of you can imagine as a sort of cookie cutter image of a scientist now have this new facet of their dimensions, and add a new facet to their dimensions of knowledge. And now when they encounter new spaces or they're on review panels or whatever, now they have a glimpse as to how to include people from different backgrounds and understand that, just what we do at the bench, that isn't just what we do at the bench, that everything connects back somehow. and that the different ways in which we engage with the world all will connect back to our work in the end. And so this was like a kind of a surprise in terms of me, like thinking that this would help me where I am today, but even being able to perform as a drag queen has taught me how to, have a stage presence, how to be clear with my communication, both verbal and nonverbal, how to get a point across. Like these are all things that I feel like I learned, and now I can say, oh, this is directly helping my ability to communicate science or communicate different sort of health things to the communities that I embody. So with that, I think that's sort of a quick overview of me and my sort of journey through the sort of world. I kind of want to leave a lot more space for like questions and comments and discussion, because I see myself here as a resource for y'all. I don't know where everyone is in their different trajectories in grad school or undergrad or post-grad or whatever, but I think we could do some brainstorming and thinking about ways in which we can help each other get and achieve the goals that we all want to achieve. So I'll just kind of stop it right there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the presentation, Gabe. So I think if there is no other thing, we can move directly to the Q&A and the discussion. So first, I want to see if there are any questions from the audience first. So feel free to unmute, or if you do not feel comfortable unmuting or doing video, please also type in the chat.
I just want to say thank you. It was absolutely amazing and inspiring, and I'm looking forward for the conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, so there is something that I was curious to know in terms of engaging with government and the public. So of course we need, I think if anything that has been shown in the past few years, there needs to be a stronger link and communication between, the people that sort of run and make decisions in our country versus like what are the actual facts and actual science that, can prevent unnecessary death or, illness. So one thing I was curious about is like, in terms of, strengthening this link, what are some of the biggest challenges in regards to that?
Let's see, so I'm going to take it from both directions. I think that there's sort of a challenge on the scientist side and there's a challenge in the government side. I think the sort of scientist challenging side, which is the thing I guess we can do to be better, is that it's not that hard to actually reach out to your representatives. And that's something I learned a lot over the last 6 years, is that everyone thinks, oh my gosh, like for me to get involved means I need to be on like a phone bank and spend hours doing something, or I need to canvas, or I need to give a big talk about, and it can be as simple as, so when you call your representative, right? Like the staffers in those offices are just taking pretty simple notes as to like who's making calls and, not just frequency, but what the quality of those calls are. And so if you say something like, hi, I'm one of your constituents, I'm an insert level of scientist here, I'm an insert level of research specialty here, they take notes of that and they realize, oh, like people who actually understand what's going on have these questions and concerns, and then can relay that back to whoever it needs to be relayed to. And so that can take anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes. And so I think a lot of times scientists and people in general just can understand that government engagement can be as simple as that. And it can go all the way up to, going to DC and physically meeting with folks. But I think starting small is a big thing that people can do to overcome the challenge. And I think on the government side, is what I've learned so far is that people are really wanting to connect with scientists, but don't necessarily know how to. And that's because, again, within the given constituents, actually one of the things at Rutgers, the Eagleton Institute of Politics, what they've done, and I'll throw a link in the chat, but basically they've gone through and they've said, they've done this study of who is currently either a scientist or medical professional in Congress right now. And I think it's something like 3% of all of our representatives make up, and like, I think very few, like if not like 2 or 3 in the federal level, and then very scattered throughout the various state levels. So people don't actually, their problem is that they don't engage with science on a day-to-day basis. The only ways they engage with it is how it's been distilled to them through their science policy advisors, through public opinions of particular things. And so I think on their end, there just needs to be more space at the table. I think, as you were saying, like sort of in the last, I want to say 5 years, there has been a bigger push to put scientists at the table. And there's a lot of really great fellowships that are for either PhD scientists or scientists at different levels to just have short stints to work in the government, with the hope that it leads to longer stints to working in the government, which is actually the position I'm in right now. Just gives a quick 1 year exposure to the government, and already we're talking about, okay, well, will you stay on longer? And I'm like, maybe. And we're trying to see how that plays out. So that's kind of my take, is that I think scientists need to do a little bit more to step up, and the government needs to do a little bit more to step down. And I think together we can overcome it a little bit.
That's actually a great advice. And I think I particularly like to talk about this aspect. I am a postdoctoral researcher. I'm pretty senior. I lead the postdoctoral association at CUNY. So, and we've been asked like several times by the New York City Postdoctoral Coalition, which are, representatives of each, postdoctoral associations across the city, to go and meet with the representatives. And for me particularly, it's something terrifying. Like as you can tell, I'm not a native English speaker, so I'm very self-aware about my English. And to me, like meeting someone from that category, I think like you need to be like to present yourself to a particular standard. I don't even know how to address these people sometimes. And this is something that it's really, I came to find that it's very, a lot of postdocs face the same fears, and for that reason I think we will never or like not soon we will get the chance to do that, to engage in that kind of conversation. And I do agree with you. I think it's amazing what you do, and I think the more we engage, the best. Another aspect is that the postdoctoral community in general is comprised more of immigrants at CUNY, when we're talking about 89%, which is and like people think that, oh, like why would they spend time to talk to us, right? Like we don't vote. So and so yeah, I want your take on this. I think it'll be great to hear from you on this aspect.
Yeah, actually, the international thing is really interesting to me too, because two of my fellowship cohort mates, one is from Italy and one's from Spain, and so they're both here internationally doing the same fellowship. And I think that the piece I've learned also working with a lot of international folks back at Princeton was that, if you've lived a place 1 week or 1 year or 5 years, you're still the constituent, right? Like you're still like one of the people who has voting power for whoever you're voting for. And so I think that people, a lot of international folks, don't necessarily like think, oh, like I haven't been here long enough to voice my opinion. And I think that there is a piece of, I want to say it's a combination of cultural competency along with getting the proper social context, where maybe it is appropriate. I would say it's a little appropriate to just give some time, right? Get a sort of temperature of things when you first move to a new space. That's kind of why a lot of times I'll be like a little hesitant to vote on local reform when I first moved to a new town, because I'm like, okay, y'all have been living here, y'all understand the problems of the community. I just come here and I bring a particular lens, and I hope that that lens can help or be a part of the greater community lens. But let's give it some time to see how it meshes. But I think after a little bit of time, like then it is okay to get involved and get connected, and that people actually really value having that international perspective sometimes, because you don't always get it, and it's not something they get to hear every day.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And since we're going to open this conversation to a lot of people, a lot of trainees that are usually following our conversations, and what resources would you suggest people to look into to become better at these skills? I think like the reason why you mentioned like it's less than 3% representation of scientists is because we do have like different packages of skills. I think like if you were to draw like Venn diagrams, I think like it will be scientists and politicians. It takes like completely different set of characteristics. I don't know if you agree, everyone else involved in the conversation. And so I think like it would be interesting to know. I would like to get better at this conversation, and I'm pretty sure a lot of trainees even more so. So what would you recommend?
Oh yeah, so in terms of getting better, one I would say, do y'all have a so actually, okay, so we'll start. So there's this one organization nationally called the National Science Policy Network. And so I started signing up for their emails and stuff in graduate school. And they do a lot. Basically, they're starting to be the sort of young professional science policy network. They're trying to really formulate a community of people who are interested in science policy, and then also provide training and resources. And so sometimes they'll have things like boot camps that are like they have, and it's all over the spectrum of things they have. They have intensive boot camps to actually sort of take you from 0 to 100 in terms of your ability to like really connect on science policy issues. They also have just sort of day or hour workshops to sort of help with a particular thing, like how to write a memo 101, how to contact your local representative in an effective manner, things like this. So I would say National Science Policy Network, I'll write that out. Is one of them. And what's cool about them is that they also can help you start your own local chapter as well. So like Princeton, we had the Princeton Citizen Scientists, so we weren't formally a part of NSPN, but we always would do stuff, you know, connected with them. But basically they encourage people to start their own chapters at their university. And it's cool, and it does span the whole gambit of, I guess, education, right? Like there's anything from undergrads all the way up to postdocs to faculty who are involved with this process, from academic institutions to people that work in government, and all across the board. So it's a really great organization. I've learned a lot just by reading their emails and going to a few of their events. So I would recommend that they're a good resource to check out.
Thank you so much. That's amazing resource.
Okay, so are there any other questions? Okay, so I have a much more broader question that sort of relates to career path. So for people who are interested in sort of being a liaison between politics and science, what sort of possibilities are out there? Because knowing a little bit about science and politics, I know that there are sort of advisors to people in the White House, to different senators and congressmen. And there are also people like you know, who are working with more like state governments and trying to help with inequities in health there. So sort of, I guess, what sort of other career paths do you see science policy going into?
Yeah, so there's a pretty good gambit. So there is, like, I think what you said, so there's sort of the direct working in government where you either work at the legislative level and work directly with Assembly or Senate to review bills. You do the research behind the science of the bills too, to make sure that the language in it is as accurate as possible. So imagine, like, you know, doing a lot of like short research projects. And I hear, and people will say it's really rewarding work, because I think on like a PhD or even like a senior thesis project where you're working on something for like years and years and years, it's 1 month. It's like you hop in, you like mad dash, use your good research skills to figure out a topic and write something comprehensive about it, and then move on to a new topic. So it's like fast-paced research, which is kind of cool. And then there's some spaces to do that also on the executive level, where as well. Then I think there's also a lot of other ways in which you can interface with government that's not directly in government. So for example, a lot of academic institutions will actually have a representative for the institution that goes to DC and lobbies on behalf of the institution and a coalition of universities with similar goals. So I know, like, Princeton had one of these, and we talked to her, and it's kind of a cool job because you just are really advocating for what the university wants and what's best for universities. And it's not just along lines of like, you know, like Princeton's peer schools in terms of doing this work wasn't like Harvard, Yale. It was actually like Rutgers or NGIT or the New Jersey Institute of Technology, because we all are New Jersey based, and we all have very similar concerns about how New Jersey education should manifest. So it's really cool to see how like that's different. Like the government space works a little different than the academic space in that way. You can also do that with nonprofits as well, excuse me. do that with nonprofits as well. They often have a liaison that does all of their sort of interfacing with the government, either providing science policy literacy. But I also think that there's a lot of transferable skills that's also not directly science policy, where a lot of these organizations want scientists because we just can really critically think about something. We can really just like read through a set of proposals related to science or social or whatever, and be able to come up with something that's really comprehensive. Our grant writing abilities, I would say, is pretty high amongst scientists, and a lot of things in academia or nonprofit sector or even government is writing and reviewing grants. So a lot of times having the eye of someone who has to I'm having flashbacks to applying to NSF, like when you've had to look at something with like a very minute eye, they really appreciate having those skills, even if it's not itself a directly science thing. So I would say there's a lot of ways we can approach it job-wise, but also don't be scared if you don't specifically get to do the science topic or area that is your sort of home base, that the sort of skills and transferable knowledge that you've developed there can easily be used in other sectors.
Hi, my name is Shanika. I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late, but I am so excited that you're here with us. One of the things that I was intrigued about when I was reading the flyer for your event is I see that you were involved with the New Jersey Department of Health. I'm not sure if you talked about that because I came in a little bit late, but like if you don't mind going through that and with the pandemic, I would really like to know more.
You cut out there at the end, but I assume, yeah, like New Jersey Department of Health in the pandemic. Yeah. So so I'll talk a little bit more about my role here. So I'm inside of the Office of Minority and Multicultural Health, and we're really tasked with just making sure that health equity is at the center of everything the Department of Health does, not just in terms of, genetic and molecular determinants of health as they pertain to different demographic populations, but also thinking about social determinants of health, how things like access to food, clean water, transportation, education, how those different factors also play into people's ability to get access to the healthcare that they need. It's a little interesting because I feel like what happened is pre-pandemic, everyone sort of had like a day job. And then the pandemic hit, and now everyone has their day job plus something related to COVID-19. So everyone here is like very highly busy. So I think a lot of time, which is a lesson I've learned from government, is that a lot of times we think of them as slow and inefficient, and it's true on one hand. But on the other hand, they often have a very limited staff to do literally all of the work. And then there are these particular moments that even more work is demanded, which will then slow the pipes on other things. So it's been an interesting lesson around that. But some of the things that I've done sort of directly is I've written and wrote metrics and reviewed grants related to solving health inequities, particularly by giving money directly to community-based organizations, to clinics, to be able to go out and vaccinate, test, provide social service support for different vulnerable and minority communities. I've been working sort of on the internal side of DOH, trying to make sure that all of our practices are as equitable and inclusive as possible, ranging from our hiring practices to the types of trainings that we're doing inside to make sure that's actually up to speed in terms of most current and best practices for cultural competent training, as well as making sure that when we're buying materials for the different purposes, that we're doing so in a way that prioritizes businesses that maybe don't get as much attention, such as minority, women, veteran-owned businesses, small businesses, especially, and local businesses all based within New Jersey. So I'm kind of a month and a half in, I think, so far of doing this work. So a lot of it's been learning. And so I like to, I think as a student, even when you're done being a student, you learn for the rest of your life. So it's nice that I feel like I'm still learning a lot, but also being able to use a lot of the expertise I had, both as a scientist and as sort of a diversity advocate, to kind of merge it together and give a kind of best practices perspective to the department. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing now, but I'd be happy to answer any specific questions you have about what's it like working here in the pandemic.
That would be good. Like, has working in a pandemic like shifted anything about what you want to pursue or anything like that? Or like, is there some things that you see that you really, really, really want to change that, but you can't change because of the system?
Hmm. Oh, that's a hard-hitting one. Let me give it a second, especially since I'm being recorded. Not really. I'm joking, y'all.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. I love these questions, and this is my favorite things to talk about. I'm just wasn't mentally prepared. I think one of the things, like, so I'm a very big picture person myself. And so one of the things I find is that the problems that we actually identify, even at the basic level, right? Whether it's that, specifically Black communities are getting lower levels of testing, or that Black mothers are having higher birth mortality rates, or, we look at these like sort of on the ground issues. And there are very specific things that we can do to change that. And I see the department doing that work. But I guess as I was saying, what's hard is that it's really the step above them that really is contributing to our inability to do it. It's that there's, bureaucracy, right? I mean, that's government in a nutshell. And there's so much like red tape, there's so many checks and balances. And while a lot of that is in place with decent intention to, make sure that things don't just change abruptly and that we can have like a systemic way to look at things as they come through the pipeline, we're sort of in a moment now where I think the speed at which we're getting knowledge and information about the different health disparities or different problems in our society, we have a lot of very educated people thinking about all these problems right now. The rate in which we can actually disseminate that is limited by that bureaucracy step. So I would love to just, tear a lot of that down personally and just be like, okay, like, why do I have to wait for person A to talk to person B to verify person C to, I think we can like streamline a lot of these processes and just make sure that we're putting the best people in those positions of power, doing a better job sort of at the gatekeeping step of who's determining these informations and do they have the right credentials to do it, and then have faith in their ability to do it correctly, especially because one of the things I've learned just working here is that people do, by and large, want to see systemic change in the government. But I think a lot of people sort of like, same in academia, you get older, you in it for a while, you get jaded, you see that I can only do so much as an individual. And so then there's a lot of, one person can only do so much. So I'm like, well, instead of us relying on individuals to change it, let's just change how we're doing things. Maybe there will be less burnout. Maybe there will be more effective implementation of policy. But again, like this is sort of a month and a half in, and that's kind of an impossible ask because to change bureaucracy means also talking to like legislator and bringing in the political side of things. And then that's a whole other can of worms to have to open up. So dream world, burn it all down, but we can just set small fires here and there and see how it goes.
See, and I knew that would be like one of your answers, the bureaucracy, because I interned at the New York Department of Health. So I was just wondering, like, would that be the same across board? So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely it's across state lines. The bureaucracy it's tough, and it's tough because at the state level, it's like the lowest level of bureaucracy I find, right? Like it's fewer people it has to go through, and even at that level, it still can take like way longer than it should. So I can only imagine how it is at the federal level, with in terms of doing anything, and why I have a little bit, very little bit more understanding for a lot of our political figures when things don't happen. I'm like, I'm sure they actually want it to change, but that form that has to be filled out can only be filed every 3 months. And so, there's things like this that it's just really dumb, but yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Yeah, so thank you for giving a glimpse into, I think, part of the frustration that's working with, the government, which is, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape. So I think that also made me curious about another thing, which is, like if you were to have a typical day at your job, like who do you normally interact with? Do you interact with, different suppliers or different, government? Is it more like, you mentioned you were focusing more on sort of the internal aspect of the New Jersey government? Do you talk more with officials or people who work within the Department of Health? And also, do you bring your work home with you? Is it a thing that you also think about during the weekend? So this is more for like people to sort of understand, like if they want to go into the direction, sort of what to expect.
Yeah. So I care about people and people's lives, but I am paid for 35 hours of work a week, and so I perform 35 hours of work per week. I think that there is academia, as y'all know, like there's the pressure to just work all the time, right? Like there's no like off switch. And actually being in the Department of Health, I've been seeing a lot of that as well. Because everyone, like I said, they had their day job, now they have their day job plus a pandemic job. And so there is this push that like to get all of that met, then you have to take a lot more home. I've been like trying to push back on that a little bit because like sort of speaks again between individual versus systems in my head, right? It's that, if we're not enough people to make sure people aren't dying in the middle of a international crisis that we've never faced, humanity has never faced, maybe we should be throwing, either more money or putting more people into that, or, it's no longer a thing of like, I can only do so much. If I can't meet the need, then clearly we need to do something bigger to like ensure that all needs are met. So because of that, I keep a pretty healthy work-life balance myself. In terms of, but there is the possibility to do more. So for example, I know a lot of my colleagues canvas on top of their day job where they'll go out like evenings and weekends and like go to like ShopRite or name a grocery store that you would go to, and just hand out flyers about vaccination, testing, try to get people scheduled for those services. And I think that that's really good work and rewarding work. I kind of try to do the same thing if I'm at a bar Friday night, like I am like talking about it to the different folks I run into. So why aren't your friends vaccinated? Have you talked to a friend today about not getting vaccinated, So I feel like organically I already do a little bit of canvassing, but we just don't get paid for it. In terms of actual day-to-day, most of my day is interacting with other New Jersey Department of Health officials, anything from sort of people who are more on the programmatic end of things, like actually running the programs and providing the services. I'm also working with a lot of higher level, like chief of staff, to actually look at, to do a lot more of the internal work, like creating diversity metrics and things like this. And then there is this possibility, and then I'm also interfacing a lot with the sort of different partners that we have, whether that's community-based organizations like nonprofits who are providing services for folks. I've been on calls with hospitals as well as federally recognized clinics to try to help them out with their, as well as regional health hubs. So working with a lot of like medical folks as well to make sure that they're up to best practices in terms of disseminating information. I've recently started working with the call center. So the New Jersey Department of Health has a call center for people to call with their different concerns about getting vaccinated or tested. Those are fun calls to get involved with. You can imagine the breadth of things people say about the vaccines and whatnot. So it's either entertaining or disheartening depending on the phone call. So pretty broad spectrum right now. And I think this is kind of pandemic specific. I'm not speaking for the Department of Health right now. So, if this gets out anywhere, it's unclear whether or not the direction all of this is going is to sort of canonize, for lack of a better word, all of these services that we're providing, knowing that COVID is not going away tomorrow. Or if this is all just part of an emergency response that maybe in a year or two, we're gonna sort of just say, okay, COVID is now the new flu, and then we just keep on moving about our lives. It's unclear what the directions are, so we'll see how much of this maintains, but I don't know. I don't have a great sense as to that yet.
So I wanted to hear more about as well. Oh no, is my Wi-Fi cutting? Okay, I think I'm back. So one thing that I wanted to, find out more about actually was that you briefly mentioned that you were, I don't remember if it was a program or if it was just an interest, was more sort of connecting sort of drag with science. So I know that there are like several other science communicators out there that, are using their drag queen identity to pair it with science communication. Is there a community that you're part of drag science, or is it? I think what I'm sort of curious to know is that do you have a community with other dragon signs? And I think it's particularly important because that students that have LGBTQ identities are sort of increasingly trying to find a community in the sciences of this.
Yeah, I would say for me, it hasn't been as much. To me, it's more, I see the drag as transferable skills to the science, as opposed to me using drag as a medium to communicate science. Just because I have more fun doing cartwheels and flips and whatnot and heels than I do like explaining what my day job is in full makeup. So that's just sort of my personal way of doing it. But it leads to great conversations. It's kind of what I was, I guess, alluding to, I'm on a bar Friday night and I am just like, I perform, and then they're like, oh, what do you do? And like, ask me questions. And then naturally, it just kind of comes out in the conversation. And I think that's the part about being intentionally intersectional, is just recognizing that you don't always have to like convert all of your things into the specific bucket that is your career path, but naturally your career path will spill into the other buckets as well, right? And I think that that's why it's been fun to do it, because how many drag queens have the name Peach Diva behind their name, so I think that's kind of how I've seen it. I have wanted to do more connecting with drag science communicators, because I have a few of them I follow on Twitter who are like super good and like funny and engaging and like will break down science and math concepts into very simple terms that I understand, especially math, because I'm a biologist. We're not known for being peak when it comes to math, but good enough, and sometimes they explain things really well for me. So yeah, I would say like I would like to get more connected, but it is, as you can imagine, there's only so many day and nighttime hours, and so we just haven't manifested that just yet.
Yeah, I think I only really asked because I think most of the drag science communicators that I know, they have a lot of like names related that are like puns with bacteria. It got me thinking like, what other names are out there that people can make that are microbiology related,
Yeah, mine is Angel Mirage Peach Diva. So I did not try to do it. Though, fun fact on the sort of Caulibacter story that Caulibacter is an infectious agent, we did discover a new species, and I did get to name it. And so I named it Caulibacter mirar, where mirar is the Latin root for mirage. So there is that. So it's kind of the opposite way. Instead of me making a name off of a drag bacteria, we now have a bacteria named after a drag queen. So
that's so cool. That's really, really, really cool story.
I also have a question about that. You're saying how drag, being, a drag queen and being a scientist together, that is your source of intersectionality. Has it ever been a problem for you? Has there ever been a circumstance where it hasn't been to your benefit, where somebody has looked down on you for being so diverse? And
yeah,
what specific circumstance was that?
Yeah, I feel as if the thing is, I can't point to like an event ever, which I think is cool, but like also like, how common is this? I mean, there is of course the like looks, which I feel like sometimes I'll go into a conference and I'm wearing my conference heels, and feeling fabulous, but still giving great science research. And like some people like are like, yeah, wow, great shoes. And some people are like clearly making looks, but not saying anything. So there definitely have been those situations. And those I just kind of shrug off and say, okay, well, you're just jealous, you know, moving on with my life. And so I can't point to anything in particular. If anything, I think it's helped my story in a lot of ways, because I think it makes me a little more approachable. Because I try to be an approachable person in general. Like I find that we communicate our science best when we don't feel like we have to put up any walls. A lot of times, I mean, I'm sure folks can relate going to a conference and you're like sitting on this data and you meet like a giant in the field and like everything is like coaxed in these terms of like professionalism between you and that person. And so maybe you get in your head about how to say it and say it right. And sometimes and communication breaks down, or you don't feel comfortable talking about it. And I think that's really disadvantaged to us being able to continue science because we're not communicating with each other. Whereas I love the stories of like historical scientists literally writing equations on napkins in the bar that they're, you know, with their other scientist friends. And then the next day being like, oh my gosh, this equation is the thing I've been trying to figure out, right? Like, and I think that that's sort of the origins of science, is like a bunch of drunk white dudes just like talking about the universe. And I say, why can't we all just kind of do that, right? A little bit more organically nowadays. Like, you know, why can't we just, I mean, not be drunk, but, you know, like go and be like loose and casual though with our colleagues in a way that then allows for us to communicate better, that there's no pretense or feelings of judgment when you say the wrong thing or you explain it in kind of an off way. But, and then kind of gets to a level of understanding. So that's why I think the drag thing has helped, because no one takes a drag queen completely seriously, but then being a scientist, they take the science I do seriously, but then the way I say it, they're not taking it as seriously. So then I feel like we can break it down a bit and be a little bit more lax. And I really enjoyed that aspect of combining the two.
That's super cool. And that actually makes me think of something else that I don't know how much we can talk about. I mean, like, yeah, I'm trying to get your take on this, right? Like, so of course there are scientists that are jealous. You mentioned the word, right? And so like, you know, like we're all scared of like, oh, sharing too much data because of, you know, like people might like spoil or like, you know, like get inspired and like scoop you for like for your research and stuff like that. So how can we integrate this, right? Like, so, because I think it's pretty interesting. I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud now, right? So people are jealous in general, right? Like you said. And so good science, if I guess like if you drag a lot of jealousy from your science, that means it's pretty good for something. But how can we like, what would be the best way to still dare to deliver your science without being scared that someone will like, I don't know, like take your research and take it from there? So, you know, like in my mind, like there are researchers that share everything because they trust their science so much that they just don't care about someone else like following their steps and trying to scoop them. And then like there are others that will like stay on like every single discovery until the day is published. How do you perceive this, and how can you teach us to, I don't know, like be better scientists in that regard?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because, and especially when I think about it along the lines of like minority and vulnerable communities, right? Like women, people of color, queer folks, you know, people, you know, like in STEM, oftentimes you do want to sit on your things because you either there's the imposter syndrome side on the most innocuous side, but then there's also the realness of historically not getting the credit that you deserve for the work that you did. So I think it's hard. I think that, again, it feels more of a, you know, big picture. Like it feels more of a structural than an individual problem at the end of the day to me, because I think the reason why the people behave in the way they do is because of the ways in which science is incentivized through publications, through grants. You know, I think the ways in which we do those make people have to be jaded and keep things to themselves and or be manipulative and try to get information from other people. And so I think we really just need to do a better job about creating more open spaces for science. That's why I'm like a huge proponent of like open access everything if possible. I think psychology is doing a kind of better job about this, where like, you pre-print a study where you provide like basically all of the information you need to about your study with the guarantee that it'll get published. And then you perform the study. And even if you get data that's weird or controversial or all negative data, then you still end up with a thing at the end of the day. So I think things like this are kind of where we need to move towards, and then people would be less, jaded about things or jealous and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's a hard question that like I don't really have a lot of answers to. I try to just, feel the vibes, make sure that the person like seems like they're in my court, and then go from there. And if they don't, then just kind of play the canonical science like tie up kind of game. But I do hope that, and I think with younger scientists, the more I talk to younger scientists, the more I feel like across the board we agree with this. Now, how much people are going to push to change the system, that's a different question, and that I'm a little skeptical about. But I am optimistic that over time we'll move towards a system that not just makes sure that the science that we do is ethical and rigorous, but that the ways in which we generate environments to do the science is also the same way.
I think that's a great point that you raised, the possibility to publish your work, and then this bioarchives, and like not necessarily to call on a certain repository, but like just in general archives or of like good research. I mean, research in general, whether people claim it's not peer reviewed, so whatever, but still it's research out there. So let the public judge whether it's a good science or not, right? Like I mean, the readers. I think that's a great point, and I'm a strong militant for that as well. Yeah, thank you. That's definitely something that is good to highlight. That's important. And maybe some of your thoughts on like I don't know, like helping our supervisors. My supervisor is very convinced on this, so I'm not talking for myself, but then like new trainees that like they're very old school supervisors out there, and then I think like would be good to hear from you, like how can we like help. How can you like what advice do you have for people that are facing this situation, and kind of like to convince their supervisors?
Yeah, that's a harder one. Yeah, I feel like sometimes that's I won't say it's futile, because I don't think anything is futile, but I think that it is a bit of knowing your advisor and knowing what the best way to go about it is, because we do have to, I guess, recognize at the end of the day, like it depends on where your advisor is, right? Like I feel like a lot of young tenured faculty, like pre-tenured faculty, right? Like for them, they have to try to publish as high impact as possible if they want to secure their job long term. So then it gets more difficult to be like, oh, well, we just need to go on the archive and it's fine. And they're like, no, like I need this for my job. Like, so I think there's competing interests. Again, makes it more of a systems problem, not an individual problem. And so I think the best thing that people can do is just like recognize the situation that they're in. I think you can push this a lot more if like, say you have a very much more tenured advisor, like it could be like, and make convincing arguments of like, hey, like we can also get high impact if we publish this here, or here. Or, oh, like I also saw this like other paper published in this journal and it did well, XYZ. Like providing like sort of a convincing argument for why you can go out open access if possible. I've also talked to like older faculty, and a lot of them seem to be on board. I think that oftentimes like then there is the student driven side where they want to publish in the best journal possible. And a lot of them, it's not always the open access journals. So I think there's just a lot of things competing there. So it's really hard to push one thing or another. But I think first people have to make the individual decision to do better and just start there. Or at least, I don't know. Maybe you also have thoughts about this, because this is something I've also had issues with and talked to friends about, and no one really has great solutions because we're all kind of in the same boat.
I feel like you're a very good mediator. Like you can take any conflict and like make it like, I don't know, like better for whoever part. Okay, that's how you come across. So this is an amazing skill.
Yeah, we try. I try. I don't. I think we all can. I think a lot of times we just get a little nervous, and I I don't know. I think my own personal narrative, being queer, person of color, and STEM, and fabulous, has made it to at some point. I think it helps to then be able to have these conversations. Or I guess it's better to know which Fs to give in the right situations, right? Like we don't have to give Fs about everything all the time. And so I think that helps to make a better, meet people where they're at.
That's amazing. It's so lovely talking to you, and I'm so glad we got the chance to do this. Thank you so much for your time and all these advice. I'm pretty sure that throughout the day I'll think about more questions to ask you, and it'll be great if we can stay in touch. Definitely from my perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I'm throwing my email in the chat now.
Awesome.
Feel free to email me if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns. Like, especially when it comes to resources, I can try to connect you. Like I gave a few in the chat, but like if there are other resources that you're interested in, I can dig through my own personal repository or ask friends to try to figure out what to get for y'all.
Fantastic. That's definitely something that we're always looking for, because again, like I'm always asking from my perspective, and I can see like even now this conversation is very academia postdoc geared. So like everything that comes out of my mouth is something that, like I face, or like my, my coworkers face. But yeah, we're always trying to open for everyone. It's something that we try our best to do. So the more resources, the better.
Excellent. Yeah. Agreed.